and podcast platforms. Let me just make sure I got everything working here. And my guest is Scott Shay. He is the author of Conspiracy U, a case study in conspiracy. Scott, thanks for joining me.
Charles, it's a real pleasure to be here.
Well, first of all, let's define conspiracy and conspiracy theory, and let's sort of parse that out, because we all know that conspiracies happen. That's part of our criminal system. It's part of our system of justice. The mafia is involved in a criminal conspiracy. Conspiracy to commit economic crime. And I think it's also safe to say that there are political conspiracies that specifically target individuals, like assassinations, attempts to undermine a person or a group through illegal means or unethical means, a subterfuge, and creating a false image in the minds of the public as a way to stop a person or a group from succeeding. But
this is different.
Yes, please go right ahead.
This is different, and that's what's so important about Conspiracy U, because a lot of these words and terms are commingled, they're conflated. Here's the key for people to understand. You can have a theory about a conspiracy, and that can be a theory about an assassination. It can be a theory about anything. Let's take a conspiracy that everybody's talking about right now. A conspiracy that the COVID-19 virus leaked from a lab in Wuhan.
Okay.
That is a theory.
Right.
There's a theory about a conspiracy. Now, what do you need to do? You need to collect facts as much as possible. You need to see what the evidence is, do as much fact checking as you can, and then either come to a conclusion or determine that you don't have enough evidence to come to the conclusion. Either way. And that's fair. I mean, that's what our criminal justice system is about. There was a theory about a collusion with respect to the last president, and there was a special prosecutor who delved into the evidence and in the end determined there wasn't a collusion. There was a theory, there were then evidence and facts, and whether there was an obstruction of justice or anything else, that's separate, but was there actually a conspiracy? And that is determined with facts.
Right. Let me just interject with regard to the theory that Donald Trump was spying for Russia, which is what the crux of that theory was. That in and of itself turned out to be a conspiracy, as we're now finding out from Special Counsel Durham and his conviction of one person and indictment of two others who were involved with falsifying information. So, you can say that, there are conspiracy theories. That's a classic example of a conspiracy that was hatched to try to impede the sitting president of the United States.
Well, I'm using this as an example right now, but yes, as an example, there are real conspiracies. I mean, the Tuskegee, there was a conspiracy in Tuskegee, which, ended up causing tremendous harm to Black men and to belief in vaccinations and the like. And there was a real conspiracy that was only uncovered within the CIA to give people LSD to test them. Later facts came out. So you can have real conspiracies. Here's what a conspiracy theory is. And a conspiracy theory is something separate. A conspiracy theory is not falsifiable. Whenever one has facts that seem to negate the theory is primary, the facts are secondary. So, for example, let's take the conspiracy theory of Alex Jones, that no shooting took place at a school in Connecticut, and maybe the school didn't even exist.
Completely made up. I mean, assuming he did say that, but
he did say that, and he was later found guilty. He was later found liable for saying it. But my point is different, because I'm using this as a as a point, which is that, or as a tool to teach in what a conspiracy theory is, because was never falsifiable. When bodies of dead people and death certificates were shown, he claimed that those were actors, that the death certificates were falsified, they were forged.
Right.
So whenever a fact came up to contest the theory, then the theory was supreme and expanded to encompass the fact that there was this cabal of people. Now, the other thing that's important to know about a conspiracy theory is that they are generally politically motivated.
Yes.
So people generally, and this goes back to the time of the French Revolution, which is sort of the beginning of modern history of conspiracy theories, where there was the so-called Illuminati.
Right.
Conspiracy theories are generally politically motivated, with a few exceptions, like Paul is dead and Elvis is alive.
Okay.
There's a few. The other thing that is remarkable,
Bigfoot, right?
Whatever, yeah, there are a few that are okay, and if people have fun with that, then it doesn't bother me. They're not so political.
Harmless. It's harmless. I get it.
It's harmless, right? But the problem with conspiracy theories, and there are two scholars, Qasim Quassam and Javen Byford, who basically went through and looked at all of the major conspiracy theories, from the Denver airport to the to pre-QAnon, but everything in between.
Anonymous, yeah.
Yeah, and they found that they just about all had political motivations. And the second thing, strangely, I think this surprised both of them, and it certainly surprised me when I started doing my research on conspiracy theories, is they frequently involve Jews as the.
But I want to get to that because, as you say, I mean, a conspiracy theory often has a political motivation to either hurt someone or some group, or benefit someone or some group by means of, force or fraud or subterfuge of some sort, by weaving some kind of a story that's going to draw people in emotionally. And oftentimes it's taking advantage of people at a time of crisis, where you're looking for an easy answer to explain things. So it's easy to then do what's called scapegoating and blame blame a group. In this case, you're talking about the Jews or a person, as an easy, cheap way of explaining what is probably inexplainable, or which maybe is being brought up as a way to deflect the actual blame from perhaps people who really are conspirators. It's very difficult to know. And before we get into the issue of the Jewish conspiracy, I want to just also mention that there are conspiratorial.
Not the Jewish conspiracy. I have to, but
no, I know.
Conspiracy theories about Jews that are
about
false.
Jews, exactly. Which, of course,
I mean,
let's be clear. Yeah, I mean, of course, and I can speak to that. I've written a couple of books on it. But there are conspiratorial styles, as Hal Broner talked about in his book in the 1950s, and also there are conspiratorial philosophies that are by nature and by their own admission conspiratorial. And I would mention in that case communism, Nazism.
Yes,
these were you look at Marx's Communist Manifesto. He says you have to engage in subterfuge in order to bring about this new way of being. You can't do it in the out front. You have to worm your way into a society and kind of get people in the right positions and then gradually bring it out. That's a conspiracy. And also the very philosophical core of communism is a conspiracy theory, which is that wealthier people, more successful people, have conspired to rip off less successful people, the theory of exploitation. But to go to the crux of your book here and what's going on college campuses, and what you discovered at Northwestern University with regard to these really dangerous conspiracies about Jews and about Israel that emanate both from the left and the right. Talk about a little bit about that and about some of your findings in that area.
Sure, I'd love to do that. And I just want to say, with respect to a comment before getting into that I go through, because the idea of how to manipulate people with conspiracy theories and really it goes back as far as Aristotle.
Sure.
you know, and I go through that with, you know, logos, pathos, and logos, ethos, and pathos. I mean,
Mhm.
the thing about conspiracy theories is they are very deep and they speak to people's desire to have special secret understanding,
Right.
and the way to get to them in susceptible. And I go into this in the book, which we
Interesting.
need 3 hours for this, but it's conspiracy theories are extraordinarily seductive,
Yes.
and we should
Interesting.
never underestimate their power on susceptible people, because people.
Well, we're all attracted to it. It's like why we watch cop shows or why we watch
Right.
movies that involve a murder conspiracy. There's something almost voyeuristic or even thrilling about feeling like you're inside something going on that is secret, and then you're trying to find out. Let's see who did it, and I mean, Agatha Christie, right? I mean, these, it's sort of solving the puzzle. It makes you feel important. It makes you feel like you're part of something outside yourself, that you're going to solve a problem. And at the end, there'll be a neat little package where everything will be solved. And aha, we found it's like in Perry Mason, they finally have the moment where somebody's standing up in the stand. I did it, because
Right.
you've cracked
100%.
yeah, I mean, you've cracked the story. So yeah, it's human nature to want to think that there might be something going on there that's not exactly kosher, and that you can be on the front seat of finding out what it is, and that you've got some intelligence in terms of figuring it out.
Right. And you're part of the secret, you're part
Yeah.
of the successful group that's going to turn everything around. And so I go into that, but and I want to just comment on one other thing. We know, and I show, and I cite this in the book, it's not actually even news anymore, that the Soviet Union purposely planted conspiracy theories.
Oh yeah,
And
sure.
that's come out in the archives. And particularly, they planted them about a lot of things, but they planted them about Jews in Israel, fully knowing that they were just made up, but they were useful.
So it goes to the Communist Manifesto. It's like you target, if you're going to target a society, you find out what are their weak points, and then you exploit those by weaving these sort of emotionally driven ideas that create more division and more tension. And thus you eventually are able to march in like the white knight on a horse and pick up the pieces and declare some easy solution.
Yep. So now I want to go into your question, though, but there were
Okay.
you left a few nuggets there that I couldn't resist commenting on, Charles. So what I found in Northwestern, I went to Northwestern.
Great school.
Tremendous gratitude toward Northwestern. I have
Sure.
2 degrees from Northwestern. I wouldn't have made it through Northwestern without them when giving me financial aid. I mean, at a certain point, and just I have a tremendous gratitude. So I was sorely disappointed, worse than disappointed, shocked, and really worried to find that professors who otherwise are brilliant and have made some significant contributions to scholarship have dug in and have purported conspiracy theories about Jews that are unfalsifiable. So let me give you just 2 examples, and there are more.
Right.
So the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm.
There's a professor of electrical engineering at Northwestern. His name is Arthur Butz. And he wrote a book called The Hoax of the 20th Century. In that book, now let me just say this, Arthur Butz is no dummy. He solved the Hilbert space curve problem and created an algorithm that substantially enhanced the ability or enhanced the computing power in his day.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that may have ultimately gotten solved, but it's no exaggeration to say that we might not be on Zoom today. It might have been a few years later had it not been for Arthur Butz. So this is not some guy in his,
he's not some schmendrick somewhere. Right. I get it. Yeah.
Okay. So he wrote this book, but after he got tenure, he wrote this book or published this book. I don't know how much was before tenure, but he published this book that said that the Holocaust, just a made up hoax. And his theory, his conspiracy theory, again, enlarged, just as I described before, to take into account any negative facts. So there are lots of documents around Europe that clearly indicate, if God forbid there were no Jews left, there are plenty of, if Hitler had been successful, there are plenty of documents that show just how the final solution at the Wannsee Conference, including documents from the Wannsee Conference, was carried out by the Nazi regime.
Of course, and there's millions of eyewitnesses. My own family has eyewitnesses of this. I mean,
So,
it's not it's something that's absolutely provable.
So, okay, so this is a fact. These are sets of facts that Professor Butts has to deal with. So his theory is, or not his theory, his contention is, no, you're wrong, because Jews, these sly, crafty Jew Zionists, very wealthy cabal, planted thousands and thousands of documents, forged documents across Europe to be accidentally discovered by investigators. So everything that you're looking at was forged. Obviously, it's crazy, ridiculous, stupid, but this is, and he believes it. I mean, he believes, were there 6 million? No. There's some, maybe there was a typhoid outbreak somewhere.
Right.
That's the worst it could be, and couldn't have been anything else. What about all the Nazis who themselves confessed to being guards, to being perpetrators, to being committing crimes against humanity?
And also, you have to ask, why would the Zionists want to wipe out 6 million Jews?
Well, wait, we're coming there.
Okay,
we're coming there.
Yeah.
So he says that this moneyed, wealthy cabal is so sly and so crafty that they, to use his word, bamboozled innocent, pure, hapless Nazis to confessing to all of these crimes that they didn't even enter their mind to kill her, to harm a Jew. I mean, he shows pictures of SS women who he says, these pure women who had to bury bodies. They were exposed to diseases by the British. Oh my gosh. He's practically crying for them. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's crazy. It's obviously made up, but it expands to incorporate the facts that are around, because there couldn't have been. How do you account for the testimony? Well, Jews, Zionists convince people somehow through their crafty methods to do it. What about the court what about Nuremberg? Well, Jews who played some minor roles, there were very few Jews actually involved, and primarily what was prosecuted there was not against crimes related to Jews, but that was all due to the Jewish influence. Why did the Jews do this? Because they said, and this is another thing where anti-Semitism and Jewish hatred, which is clearly Arthur Butts is a Jew hater, morphs into and uses the language of anti-Zionism, because he says, no, he's not really anti-Jewish. He has nothing against the Jews. In his heart, he's an anti-Zionist. And this is what surprised me, because we're going to get to it later, but he sounds very much like folks on the left. The Zionists wanted to do this so that they could swindle, to use his word, Germany out of lots of money and displace the Palestinians. That's why they did this.
Well, let me ask, what makes a man like that tick? I mean, that is so completely twisted and illogical. I mean, if the Zionists wanted to make money, I mean, how would they make money by leading 6 million Jews to the gas chamber? I mean, if they wanted to make money, they would have left the 6 million Jews in place so they could emigrate to Palestine. I mean, that's
what he said they did, and he also said that they immigrated to the United States. But
a tiny number. I mean,
it's so easily, but nothing becomes falsifiable by him, and that's the key. Nothing is falsifiable. Here's what should make everybody who's listening really almost cry. Is that 11% of millennials believe that the Jews caused the Holocaust, and 15% think that it was either it was either a myth or tremendously exaggerated. So that's people under 40. It's actually not just millennials.
Okay.
So this is what Butts is saying, by the way, is not just on the far right. I'm going to quote a rock star person on the far left, Stephen Saleta, who you may have heard of. He was a professor at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana. He says, the Nazi Holocaust in Europe seems a direct antecedent to Israel's founding. There were plans from the outset of Zionism to rid the promised land of its indigenous peoples. The problem with the remembrance of the Nazi Holocaust, Stephen Saleta says, is that it happens in isolation from relevant historical events, and worse, from its ongoing consequences. It's not very useful at all if a corresponding genocide is taking place, as with the Palestinians at the hands of Israel. So again, there's the political motivation. The far left, Stephen Saleta, is making an assertion pretty close to Arthur Butts, but there's a professor at Northwestern, Professor Stephen Thrasher, who I analyze his ideas and what he writes. And again, a brilliant person.
Right.
So just to summarize, Professor Butts thinks, and I don't go through it all, can't do it all in this podcast, but Professor Butts, I do in the book, Professor Butts thinks that Jews are conspiring, are moneyed cabal, they're fake whites conspiring against all real white people. That's his conspiracy theory. On the far left, you have just one of many examples that I give. You have Professor Stephen Thrasher, who believes that Jews are Zionists. Again, it's too polite to use the word Jew, but Zionists are conspiring against all people of color. They are conspiring with police departments across the world to oppress people of color, that they're using drones above Gaza to gas people using Holocaust terminology, and he's done it even more in tweets that he's deleted. It's more explicit even the Holocaust, calling for essentially arguing of a Palestinian genocide that doesn't exist. And onward, taking every opportunity to talk about somehow Jews causing tremendous harm to people of color because they're this moneyed cabal. And he too thinks there's some good Jews. It's like Butts thinks the Jews that agree with him are good, and Thrasher thinks the Jews who agree with him are good. And I cite professors who say things like, and have won awards for conspiracy theories in which they contend that Jews are mining organs from Palestinians, they're starving Palestinians, they are doing a whole host of things which you couldn't even really say out loud against any other people, but again and again, it is Jews conspiring to harm all people of color. And the conspiracy theories are so far to the right. I cite one professor at Northwestern, a professor of anthropology, who thinks Hassan Nasrallah should be considered in sort of the Nobel Peace Prize group of Nelson Mandela and Gandhi. And of course, your listeners may not know, but Hassan Nasrallah has been pretty open about his view that every last Jew on the planet should be exterminated.
Right. And also he's an open racist in that he believes that Jewish blood is perverting the world, and he has this whole bizarre theory. And of course, if you get into the third leg of the anti-Semitic stool, which is the Islamic radicalized leg, it's that the Jews are, like the Holocaust didn't happen, but we're glad it happened. It's kind of like a weird sort of a juxtaposition of both positions at the same time. But, the right-wing version of the theory, I think, frankly, and I'm going to be blunt here, it goes back to what at various times have been a major stream in Christian thought, which is that the Jews conspired to kill Christ. And thus, once they did that, we're like revolutionaries. This is something that E. Michael Jones has talked about on my program, actually, that because of this, we're rebelling against the world. We're rebelling against the order of the universe because we killed the Messiah. And, while that kind of collective conspiracy theory has lessened, it's reemerged both in terms of blaming the Jews for both sides of the fence. Like in the 19th century, after the Paris Commune of 1871, the Jews were blamed both for the communist takeover of Paris by the right and for the being too bourgeois by the communists. We were responsible for both capitalism and communism. Both sides blamed the Jews. Somehow the Jews were, it's like this crazy kind of situation where we're not going to win either side. It's like both sides are having their conspiracy theories.
Well, the communist, I mean, look, if you read, which I show, the communist conspiracy theories about Jews sound somewhat similar to the Nazi conspiracy theories, but they are, again, they focus on different groups. So the communist conspiracy, this is from the Great Soviet Encyclopedia. The main posits of modern Zionists are militant chauvinism, racism, anti-communism, and anti-Sovietism. The anti-human reactionary essence of Zionism is an overt and covert fight against freedom movements and against the USSR. International Zionist organizations own major financial funds. It also influences or controls media agencies and outlets. It serves as a front squad of colonialism and neo-colonialism and actively participates against the national liberation movements of the people of Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Now, the Soviet archives make it clear that these were manifestly made up. Some of them for the 1950s when Israel didn't have 1 million people, and somehow were the enemies of the world. It sounds very similar to, frankly, what's coming out of the far left today.
It does. I noticed that, and I think that the kind of the kernel of the leftist version of anti-Semitism actually came from Karl Marx himself, who wrote a pamphlet called On the Jewish Question, that would eventually be renamed A World Without Jews, where he said that the Jews were involved with making, they worship money, they were involved with self-interest and egotism and trade with what he called huckstering, and all of the things that basically describe capitalism and describe freedom, frankly, and the American way of life. But for the communists, these things are obstacles standing in the way of their utopian version of a one world ant colony where everybody would be equal. So that would morph into what we now hear, which is that Israel is involved with this kind of chauvinism. And I think that at the core, what the left really hates about Israel and probably about Jews, well, particularly Israel, are two things, and that is it's capitalist and it's religious. It believes in God.
You know what? The truth of the matter is the communist theories were started and were in the Soviet encyclopedia, even when Israel was, frankly, in the 50s, very socialist. I mean,
yeah, sure.
The Moscowitz movement, the banks were owned by the government, and the trade
Although
unions.
we should note that right after Israel's declaration of independence in 1948, David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister, did make it clear that he was tilting in the direction of the United States. And that was seen as a major betrayal on the part of the Soviet left. And also the right-wing theory emanates out of that same root, in that what they did was they took the Marxist idea that the Jews are hucksters and that we believe in such horrors as private ownership, and they added a race element to it. They added like that somehow the Jewish race, in other words, for the Nazis, it was not just a social conspiracy, it became a racial conspiracy.
Well, that's what part of the issue, and this is why I don't like the term anti-Semitism, is that prior to a fellow by the name of Wilhelm Marr,
oh yeah, sure,
in the late 1800s, people, the German word was just Judenrein. They just are Judenhass.
Sure.
and not Judenrein, Judenhass, which is Jew hatred. People
Right.
just said they hated Jews. He didn't think that sounded so nice. And he was a politician and he wanted to get more people involved in hating Jews. So he came up with this name called anti-Semitism, and he started the Anti-Semitism League. And that's exactly what's happened with this notion of anti-Zionism, is that it's not so nice sounding to say people hate Jews. So they just hate Zionists.
Right.
And that sounds better. So you can be anti-Zionist, but Jews are okay. So in other words, if you read Jewish Voice for Peace's on anti-Semitism book, they claim that basically, and this is again, sounds like the far left and far right, they claim that Zionists cause anti-Semitism. There wouldn't be any anti-Semitism without Zionists. Therefore, if you are
You're blaming
Zionist,
Israel for anti-Semitism,
if
basically.
you essentially, yes, if
Just
you
because
are
it
a
exists.
Zionist, you have
Yeah.
whatever's coming to you, even though that constitutes between Jews and Israel and any poll of Jews, probably 90% of Jews who are not against the state of Israel, at least.
Right.
And so those Jews have anything coming against them for the thought crime of thinking that Jews have the right to self-determination, which is ridiculous because we think every group should have the right for political self-determination. And yet that's okay. And it's strange that only anti-Semitism, only anti-Jewish hatred is allowed to be defined by people who don't like Jews. Most people, I mean, you would not say it was appropriate or fair for white people to define anti-Black racism or for white people to define anti-Asian racism. That's like really not right. But in the case of Jews, people who are not Jews are given for some reason that right. So there's a fundamental anti-Semitism that, you know, or anti-Jewish hatred that's really, unfortunately, a common thread, and it's very troubling. And look, my book Conspiracy U, I think what I do that I think that is important is I go through these really smart people. I dissect what they're doing. I show how they're non-falsifiable and how these conspiracy theories are masquerading as scholarship. One professor at Northwestern University co-authored a book where it is indecipherable, actually, unless you start out thinking the Jews are all evil. Terms like campus rabbi are in parentheses. I'm sorry, in parentheses, in quotes, which is similar to happens on the far right, where Jews are surrounded by three parentheses at the beginning and the end of their names. So
they're not really, well, they have a whole conspiracy theory about the Jews being the Khazars and all of that stuff. So that's a whole different ball of wax.
a whole different, that's another unfalsified. Well, actually, that has been falsified. I don't want to say that's unfalsifiable. It's been falsified. Jews don't have any, well, I don't want to say any, but there's
a little bit, but exactly.
DNA, but that's sort of the natural that if you know,
linguistics and DNA prove that that's not the case.
Correct.
For sure.
And so you have in that book, it's about anthropologists being oppressed by Zionists. And like Zionists have nothing better to do than to see who's being accepted in PhD programs and getting tenure and faculty positions in anthropology departments. But they find two people in their entire research whose tenure track was questioned because they were pro-Palestinian. They end up getting tenure, by the way, so they had no negative consequences. And yet they feel that's, so after going through and finding no one was harmed, finding no tangible evidence, but everybody feeling that way, that's proof to them. Now, normally, if you do an investigation and you're a academic and you're really looking for proof and you find none, literally none, other than the way people felt oppressed. They felt the Jews in their classroom moles. They felt they were being spied upon. you would actually question whether they needed therapy, maybe cognitive behavioral therapy or something like that, because they were believing in these oppressive forces. Forget that they're Zionists, oppressive forces hurting them and causing all sorts of harm, but there's absolutely no evidence of it. But you certainly wouldn't publish it at Stanford University Press and get a grant from Northwestern to help write that.
Oh, okay. I mean, well, it's kind of a situation where Israel will stand up for itself. It'll stand up for the sovereignty of its own people when they're under an attack by genocidal forces. And I think they do it in a war is war. It's not, it's not pretty, but they do it in a context that I think is more ethical than you could expect from any army in history. And yet every time they do it, the cameras go in and they give an example of where somebody was hurt, and they're like, oh, look at the Jews doing that.
I give an example of another Northwestern, and I'm going to have to go after this because I have another interview backed up. But there's a professor who also teaches the Al Dura hoax, which is a Palestinian young man who was purportedly killed by the IDF, being cradled in his father's arm when it was physically impossible for that to happen.
No, that was a complete, that was
complete hoax.
You have a snapshot and you can then put it into whatever you want to read it into. Scott, so listen, I really appreciate you joining me. Really interesting talk. Like to do it again sometime. Let my listeners and viewers know where they can get information about your book or anything else you'd like to share.
Sure. Well, they can come to my website. It's scottshay.com, SHAY. You can get my book basically anywhere that books are sold. It's easy to get on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, quality bookstores. I love independent bookstores. Unfortunately, there are too few of them. And it's Conspiracy You, a Case Study. And I encourage anybody who's worried about campus or who's sending children to university or is thinking about sending children to university. And a lot of people have been sending my book to people at university. That's been actually a big source of people sending books these days. So thank you for having me on your show, Charles. I do look forward to coming back. You went deep fast. So thank you.
All right, Scott, listen, thanks so much again for